Welcome to another live stream here at Lighting Bot. We have a new guest today called Gary Martin, which you should remember because we had a very extended interview last time. Normally we do 1 hour, but it was fairly popular, so it's extended to almost 2 hours, to the point that we got exhausted and we decided just to stop it. So a reminder, Lighting Bot is a community for artists. If you are new to this channel, it's a growing community. We do portfolio review. If you're looking for work and you need some help, we have to help you. We do highlights. If you're doing a good job, we'll promote you and make sure you get noticed. Specifically to us recruiters, because I do talk a lot to recruiters and have a wide network on that front as well. We do have some ongoing tutorials for Unreal. It's been slowed down a bit, but some more should be coming. The Unity tutorials are also progressing, so stop by the channel and have a look for that. We do lighting mentorship as well. There's a limited spots. Currently it's full for November, but you can then tune up on December. So you can go to the Discord channel or lightingbot.com. And also a reminder, it's growing to be one of the biggest channels on the internet when it comes to lighting, look development, and VFX. So it's a good resource for people who want to watch that. Now to the main part. Let us welcome Gary back into the stream.
Hey, good to be back.
Welcome. So, how you been?
Yeah, good, thank you. Very busy, as always. But yeah, great to be back. I've been following everything you've been doing since our last talk, and so many people reached out to me after our last talk, which has been really cool. So thank you to everyone that did that.
That's good to know. Hopefully that happens again. It's always useful when that happens. So today we're gonna go a bit freeform compared to before. Before it was kind of freeform, but still we had a lot of questions ahead of time. Just a mention for people watching on Twitter, because we're streaming on Twitter as well this time. Those Twitter questions won't show up on my stream software, so I will be watching the comment field on the Twitter for any questions. But let's get started. So last time we were briefly covering some of the topics when it comes to certain things like remote work. I also went briefly into freelancing, the differences, and working from home and so. So I thought it would be nice to once and for all clarify a little bit about the differences, but also make people aware of the pros and cons, because there are some pros, there are some cons, and there is some restrictions and advantages depending on what you pick. So how about we start with working from home?
Yeah, so you know, at OPM Jobs, which is the company I work for, we're a recruitment agency. We deal with game studios all over the world, and we recruit across lots of different disciplines. But I'm specifically lighting, technical art, and visual effects, which is why we're talking again. And when it comes to working from home, that's something that I think a lot of people have had experience with over the last couple of years. I'd say 90% of the people that are probably watching this, if not more. And when I say working from home, what that's different to me than working remotely. So working from home to me means that you work for a company that is based in the same country as you, and that you work from your home and potentially sometimes have some visits into that employer, but 90% or more of the time you're at home, and you basically have a permanent contract. You have all your benefits that come with that permanent contract, and it's no different to from a legal sense, it's no different to you being in a building, in an office surrounded by other people. You're a permanent employee with benefits, with holidays, with everything that comes with that. That's what working from home is. The reason I say that that's different, sorry if I'm going into the question you were going to ask me next, Amit, but
No, just keep talking. It's fine.
The reason I say that's different from working remotely is because working remotely to me means that you're working probably in a different country from the employer that you're working for, and you work from your home in that country, and usually almost all the time, that means that you cannot legally have a permanent contract. Now, this is the key thing, and I've had this conversation so many times over the last couple of years because people don't really know this unless they are a business. So people think, well, I'm working from home right now, and I did what during all of the last year, so why can't I just continue doing that for another employer who's based anywhere? The reason is because legally speaking, you cannot actually, in most cases, have a permanent contract for a company that is not based in the same country as you, because you aren't paying tax into the country that the company is in, so you cannot be a permanent employee. And that what that usually means is that you need to be a freelancer or a contractor or both. And what that also might mean is that you need to be a limited company. So you might need to start your own limited company, which basically you employ yourself through. And those that have any experience doing that will know that that means that you need to be taxed as a business and not as an employee, which means you have to do your own taxes. It means your tax rate might be higher, it might be lower, depending on the country that you're in, but it's probably going to be different no matter what. And it usually also means that you won't necessarily have all the benefits that normally come with a permanent contract: holidays, sick pay, bonus schemes that are usually included as part of a contract. All of these things that you would normally have if you were a permanent employee. And that's where it gets really tricky. And that's why it's not just as simple if you're talking to a recruiter or in our company as, well, I'm at home right now and working, so why can't you just do the same thing? You know?
All right, so there's a couple of things obviously that we briefly covered. So you have working from home and you have working remotely. So sometimes we get questions in our community in terms of working from home and working remotely. What are the pros and cons? You mentioned some of them briefly, but let's make the assumption that people do not have any experience running their own business from before, so they definitely don't know all of the details. But as well, what are the pros of working from home? You still get all the benefits, I assume. It's just that you're working from home, I would assume. But what happens if you pick working remotely? What do you have to consider in terms of your salary? Like, because you have increased cost, I am assuming you have more responsibility. You don't have probably pension or sick. I don't know. Depends on country, obviously. But let's stick to the countries you're aware of.
Yeah, so assuming that you're talking about being employed by a company that is not in the same country as you, and therefore you're working remotely, um, the there are pros and cons to that. The major pro being that you don't have to relocate you and potentially your entire family to another location in order to do a job that you feel you could perform effectively from home without having to relocate. That's a big pro. The another pro is that you get to use whatever setup that you're used to at home, or potentially have that setup provided to you by the company if that's something that they would be willing to do. And you also don't have to move your whole life to a different place or anything like that. So those are the major sort of pros that you're thinking of. You also get to manage your time in a more potentially on your own, I guess, prerogative. Like, you'll still probably have working hours from the company, but typically working from home provides a more flexible work structure that you can manage yourself. So those are the major pros: and no commute, saving money on travel, saving money when it comes to buying a lunch every day or whatever you might do. That sort of stuff does
Eating
really add
more
up.
because you're
Yeah.
home.
Oh yeah, for sure. Eating more because you are home. For not one of the things that I was talking to someone about recently, just a few days ago, last week, was they noticed that when they worked in an office, they would get dehydrated quite a lot because they didn't want to get up. They just didn't realize they were working, they were talking to people, and they wouldn't think to go to the kitchen and get themselves a drink in the office. But when they were at home, it's at home. If you're thirsty, you just get up and get a drink. It's like in the next room, probably potentially in the same room as you're in. So just stuff like that, being a bit more comfortable if that's how you are. But this is all be mindful that this is all completely dependent upon the person. To some people, not leaving the house to go to work is a nightmare. But to others, it's great. So
But you work from home as well, don't you? It's not a
yeah,
remote work. You as a recruiter also work from home. Um, so so you're working from home. I'm working from home at the moment, but I also happen to live near my office, makes it a lot easier because you run back and forth. You can come here for the lunch if you want to, and go back to work. So there's other opportunities for me as well. But for people who work from home versus people who are working remotely, have you heard anything about in terms of work efficiency? Do you have any feedback from people that are comfortable? Because I know some companies are uncomfortable hiring remote, even though it's increasingly popular now. People are infrastructure is set up in a lot of companies to deal with it now. What are your thoughts or experience in that?
yeah, that's very, very good question. I think this is hugely dependent on the person that you're talking to. So, and also it depends on what your role is in a team who's making a game. So, if we're talking about artists and lighting artists in particular, let's take for example, there are some people that say if I have a task and I have a few environments or a set of environments that I need to be lighting and that's what I'm doing and I'm very focused, then some people find that they focus a lot better when they're at home. But then there's other people that can't focus when they're at home because they might have other people that are also at home which distract them. They might have other things going on. They might live in a noisy environment or something like that. But then there's also the fact that making games is a team. It's a team effort in most cases, and it's really important that there's communication across those communication channels are there, whether that means that you're all in the same room or in the next room talking to one another and looking at each other's screens and figuring out. But if you can say that you really have a smooth communication method working from home where people regularly show and share work and have a system where you can access each other's work, because I've heard stories about people like literally working off of like hard drives and stuff like that, or like flash drives that are getting passed around, and it's like by the time you do your work on it, it's already changed, someone else has done something else. So I think a shared infrastructure there, some sort of intranet server that you can all work off of, seems to be the way to go, but it's an expensive solution for a company. So it's just important that you can say it's not just a case of whether or not you're efficient, it's a case of whether or not the company is efficient, with some people working from home, some people not working from home, a mix of both. Because if you're lead, if you're a report to a lead, and that lead feels as if they can't lead effectively unless you're all in there, then that means that you're not being led effectively if you're working from home, which might not be great for your career, even if it's more comfortable for you. So it's important to think about other people's perspectives and not just what your own preference is, especially if your options are limited, which they sometimes can be.
All right. So the thing with working from home versus remotely, or even both, I think, because I've heard it a few times, even from people who are working from home, but even more so with remotely, is because I know you're a pretty good recruiter, and I know you have a genuine relationship with most people you talk to, and like with me, we're building close relationship and friendship over time, and I'm assuming some people are talking to you about things, but have you had incidents where people are saying that working remotely or from home is difficult in terms of social needs, depression? Because I've heard, different companies that because we talk to each other, we're talking about it, like it gets a bit too isolated. Even if you have friends and family, you want to also talk to your colleague face to face. It's not the same as doing it over camera and typing, and it's also a lot more misunderstanding when you're doing the typing. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, definitely. There's people that have nowadays, as we come out of the COVID pandemic and stuff like that, and things are starting to head in the right direction in most places right now. People are starting to, there's a lot more flexibility than what there used to be, and also a lot more options than what there used to be, because some people are saying, you're not working from home if you work here, unless it's dangerous for you to do so. Some people are saying you can have a hybrid approach and this is how it works, and some people are saying you can work remotely, and some are doing a mix of all of those. But yes, there's three types of people now that I tend to speak to, and every conversation sort of starts this way. And either person either says, I don't really care where I go. I can go anywhere, or I can go to, or I can work remotely. It doesn't bother me. I'm easy. Or there's people that say I only want to work remotely because I feel that I work more effectively and I don't want to move my family. And then there's the other people, which is why I'm mentioning this, which is I definitely do not want to work remotely full time. And most of the time, the reason for that is because of the social stuff, because of the mental health stuff. And it cannot be understated how important this is, because to someone who doesn't suffer with that sort of feeling of isolation when they're alone, it feels, you might think, hey, working from home is great and it doesn't bother me. I can't believe you're not taking advantage of this. But there are other people in the world who need that communication and people around them in order to function happily. And that's nothing that people should be ashamed of, just because other people don't feel the same way. And it's really important. I had someone recently that was exactly like this, who said to me, I was talking to them about a job, but because of the circumstances of the studio and where they were, they if they were to go for that job, they would have to work remotely.
Right.
And they said, this is, potentially dream job material for me, but I can't interview for it because I just can't work remotely full time,
Yeah.
because it affects my mental health and I'm
Yeah.
not happy.
Yeah, I can use myself as an example as well, just to fill it in as well, because technically you wouldn't do it, so I'll do it for you. Is I was also asked to move, but that's a different reason as well. That's because I don't have a visa, so that requires me to move, and that's something I guess for people to consider as well when it comes to relocation. Is if you don't have a visa or the ability to come and go as you please, you are less likely or not likely to be allowed to work remotely away from the country at all. But I believe some people who do have the passport, like they are British citizens in this case, are allowed to work abroad. As long as they can come back when needed, as the studio see fit, they are allowed to work from like other countries basically. At the same time, if you're from another country like myself, the studio is obviously a bigger deal when it comes to the community and the social part, because you move to another country, you're not necessarily you don't have any friends or necessarily any family, so your first contact of building a social network is the studio. It's where you're working as your colleagues, which is obviously a lot harder when you are remotely and or working from home, as we're talking about, is the correct term as well. So, I mean, that is a big deal, I think, for a lot of people, and I do agree on that. And for the viewers, if you want to leave your thoughts, feel free to leave your comment, and I will read it up if you do feel comfortable sharing your experience and your insight as well. So we'll take go a bit back and forth. I'm not too picky about the structure this time around, so what I'm going to do is ask one question from one of the viewers, and it is Ray's. He's asking, what about sponsorship for juniors? I'm a tech VFX artist from Egypt. So is it doable for a studio to sponsor juniors? Also, what about remote work for juniors?
Yeah, I suspected this question would come up. I'm asked it often, and it's important to get the right answer out there, because some people will tell you you definitely won't be sponsored if you are a junior. I don't think that that's true. There are some jobs that you definitely won't be sponsored for if you're junior. And when I say junior here, I'm assuming that we're talking about graduates or people with, you know, less than a year experience or maybe up to a year experience, right? So, you know, if we talk about someone who's a graduate or a junior, um, let's take your example, Ray's specifically. You're a technical and visual effects artist. If that is the case and you have the skills of a technical artist and a visual effects artist, in a lot of countries that is considered a skill shortage. And what a skill shortage means is something that the government in whatever country you're looking at has deemed to be difficult to hire for with the people that have the skills for the job in the country that the company is in. So if there is a skill shortage, then you are more likely to be able to get a visa for those roles, even if you are junior. I'm not, you're still less likely to get a visa than someone who is more senior than you. The reason is because it's actually quite a large cost to a company to sponsor a visa, and it's not just a one-off cost either. So they have to continually pay that sponsorship until you no longer need sponsored. And they're also paying your salary and anything else that is included. So it means that you're a larger cost to the company than what you would be if you were already in the country on the salary and they didn't have to sponsor you. So it's less likely, but it's not impossible. You need to just stand out among your peers. You need to make sure that you show that you are worth that sponsorship, and that you. The way to do that is to have a good portfolio and to have a well put together CV, which we won't go into. I don't on this call. We've done other videos about that anyway, where you can see exactly what I recommend when it comes to CVs and portfolios. But it's not impossible. It is less likely, but you just need to show that you are someone who is worth it. Remote work for juniors is a different question. That is also not impossible, but far less likely in my experience. The reason basically being is that you when you're brought into a studio as someone who is a junior in your title, then usually the intention of the studio is to have someone mentor you or multiple people mentor you in order to make you not a junior as quickly as possible. Because if the more time that you spend as a junior, the more time that you are potentially contributing less to the project than the team is giving you an experience. So they want you to become to take more ownership as quickly as possible, to have the confidence and the skills to take more ownership. And typically speaking, that is more effectively done if you are actually working in the same location as the team, with constant communication, people giving you feedback on your work, constructive criticism to make you better. And also you get to constantly see other people's work all around you, which is really key. Any graduate who's experienced university or college over the last couple of years from home might know what it's like trying to learn when you don't have the easy access to just ask a question, because you're not in the room. And it's something that people find a lot, really, and it's a subconscious thing where you think, um, if you were in the room with your lead or a senior or someone who is mentoring you and you had a quick question, you can just say, hey, what is it I'm supposed to do? Is it this button or this button? What does that do? And it's really quick. They look at your screen, they say, it's that one, here's why. And it has been 15 seconds of both of your time. But it feels like a much bigger investment of someone else, of your time and someone else's time to ask if you have to call them on, Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever else you're using, or message them and say, describe what the issue is, try and take a screenshot, share your screen, whatever it is you're doing, and then they have to give you the feedback. And then if you have a follow-up question, you have to go back to them with it. And it seems much harder for you and for them, and people are less confident in asking those questions. So it can stunt your learning a little bit. There are some studios that work fully remote all the time, and that's what they've done for a long time. And if that's the case, remote work for a junior is possible, but probably specifically if they're looking for someone who is a junior, and that's a stipulation on the job description where they're saying we're looking for a remote based junior visual effects artist, for example, and those aren't too common. but I would say most of the time you're less likely to be considered on a full-time remote basis if you're more junior.
Well, pretty sure you won't get this extensive answer anywhere else, so that should fill in most of the blanks. So Emmanuel Alimandi, which I believe you know, um, he agrees. As a junior artist, he would feel uncomfortable working remotely because he would miss face-to-face communication and cooperation. The first job experience that remotely could be very intimidating in few words. So I guess he's also saying he would prefer not to work remotely. I mean, I agree with what you said, and you covered most of it. I think in that you do miss the learning curve. I've heard a couple of stories this year as well, where people work in the same studio and they have like seniors, the lead they can learn from. They grow much quicker than someone who is working remotely or alone, obviously, as well, because it's not the same social dynamic, it's not the same social rules, so to speak. And there's this am I disturbing? You don't really know for sure what's going on the other end. I think that's definitely true. I think in this particular case, I also want to point out for the viewers that this is also one of the reasons you might not get the job. So when you do get turned down, keep in mind there are many reasons for it, and one of the key reasons is the fact that you're an extra cost if you don't have the visa already, or if you're not from the country. As Gary said, there's a cost for the company. So when you do get a no, keep that in mind. It might not be because of your portfolio, it just might be they happen to find someone who lives in the same city and they can save the cost, right? So I do want to point that out as well, because I know a lot of people get turned down when they, and even me as well, get turned down a lot, especially from Canada and US. It's pretty hard to get in there because they, I think as a country, they have a quota as well. Like there's a certain quota for each company, I've heard.
Yeah.
Not sure
Uh,
if it's true.
Yeah, that is true, and it's the same for most countries. There's a company gets a visa sponsorship license, and they can sponsor a certain amount of visas per year. That's quite common, and they often, will separate those as a business into different departments and different seniority levels, and they have a hiring plan. Like a lot of people just think, oh well, companies are just hiring for whatever jobs are listed on their website. In reality, it's not uncommon for me to speak to a company and for them to say, so in the next 12 months, we're planning on hiring 98 people. Like they know the exact number and they know exactly what all those jobs are, and things will probably change as they go through the year, undoubtedly. So I doubt anyone has ever had their financial plan go swimmingly and just exactly as they planned. But that's how far in advance they're thinking about things like visa sponsorships, and they might have to say, we really can't sponsor a visa for this person because it's unplanned, and we have plans for our remaining visas for the rest of the year.
All right. No, I totally agree. I mean, everything goes to plan always. All the money, everything. Nothing goes wrong. Life is so easy,
Yeah.
for sure. So there's one thing as well is I had in my head. So when you're working remotely or working from home, I suppose, or also if you have to move, um, there's something that a lot of people make an assumption about, which I learned the hard way, which is things like having your stuff transported over and covered, or having transported stuff over to you, whether you should have the equipment already, or if you have to make the assumption that the studio sends you the screens, the PC. Are there any specific rules or tips or advice on how to navigate that part of the contract and negotiation?
Yeah, this is all over the place right now. A lot of companies and studios uh, are new to a large amount of their staff working from home or working remotely, and they there different policies across the boards when it comes to this sort of thing. So some companies will say, just tell us everything that you need and we'll give you it all and we'll pay for it and we'll send you it. There are some companies who are saying um, that they will give you a questionnaire, and you fill out what processor you have and what GPUs you have and everything, and your current PC at home, and then they sort of fill in the gaps of what you require to work on their game. There are some that say we're not sending anything if you're working remotely, because we're not in a position to do that, especially if you're not technically on a permanent contract. Then my advice on this, which I think is the helpful part, is, since this is just all over the place, is ask whenever you're in. Don't ask on a first interview necessarily, because in my mind, a first interview is you getting to know the company and maybe the project, if they can talk about it, and the team, and vice versa, them getting to know you. And then if that goes well, then you can start saying, okay, we're interested in each other now, let's start asking the questions, kind of thing, to see if it's going to be the right fit. At that point, you can start saying, so what's your policy when it comes to what you can send me if I'm working remotely in order to get the job done? What licenses do you pay for? What equipment can I get? If you're relocating, a lot of companies are a little bit vague when they just tell you what the relocation is, and it will just be like, hey, there's a relocation allowance of this amount, but quite often you'll find that amount can only be used for certain things. So just ask the question and say, like, okay, so it's this amount, and if you're wondering very specific things, like, can I use that to bring my cat from this country to this country? To you, that might seem like a silly question that you should just be able to work out on your own, but it's actually really important. So find out the answer to those questions, make a list, and say, if I was just going to move to this country and someone said, I'll pay for some of it, you would think of all the questions you would ask that person. You would say, what is it exactly that you're paying for? Will you pay for this? Will you not pay for this?
Right.
Are you actually paying for it, or do I pay for it and then you reimburse me? And how does that work? Because you might still find that you actually then lose some money that way, or gain some money that way if the exchange rate works in your favor. So it's really important to ask those questions and be
I
very
didn't do that
specific.
some of the last times, and like the first few times I didn't do it when I started out, but then again I didn't do it the last times I was relocating between the countries. I just paid it for myself, and then I asked afterwards, like, maybe I should have asked. Apparently it's common to ask for the relocation package and stuff, and I didn't do it during the contract one of the last times, but they covered it afterwards, and this one time I even got more than I spent, so that benefited me as well. So I was quite happy with that. So I mean, it does happen, but I definitely, because that's why I'm asking as well, because it's not something you think about until you are in the situation and you go like, I spend a lot on that. And it's the same with other topics like courses and stuff. If you're learning something, if you can phrase it in a way and show that it's an advantage, is something you can also have in the contract ahead of time, that any educational stuff you can kind of have some of it covered.
Yeah, I think something that people underestimate a lot of the time, especially if you're on your own, single and quite young, and just think, hey, I can just move, I have no ties, everything is fine. You're almost definitely underestimating how much stuff you have, because people just then, they think, oh, it's just going to be me and I don't need any of this furniture or anything, so I'm just going to get a couple of boxes and then I'll ship those and then I'll move. You're probably going to have a room full of boxes. You're not going to realize that your PC is 2 boxes just on its own, and then everything else that you need. So just think, if I'm moving, realistically, what do I actually need to have, and what am I taking, and what am I leaving, and what am I doing with the stuff that I am leaving? Because you can't just leave a room full of stuff, especially if you're renting somewhere.
That's true. I think when I moved to France, I think I sent down maybe 4 or 6 boxes, maybe out of 24 boxes. I had to prioritize. And then when I moved to UK, I sent down 2 boxes. So I cut down even more. Now I'm very careful about buying too much in case I have to relocate again or something happen. Like, don't buy too much, don't buy too much. Then I bought like a mini gym in my apartment. I'm like, yeah, that's gonna be expensive to move around.
Yeah,
So yeah,
people don't think about this stuff. I mean, I've done it as well. I relocated just from Scotland to England, but I thought, yeah, I'll definitely just get everything in my car, and I ended up having to do a journey back and forward multiple times. I ended up driving for about 32 hours back and forward just because of I had to fill my full car up twice with stuff that I just didn't think I would need, and that was me leaving all of my furniture. So yeah, but that's probably because I have so many video games. But that's besides the point.
I sold all of mine when I moved. Actually, I had like 300-400 from all the Nintendo consoles, and I had to get rid of them just so I could move.
Oh, that pains me.
Uh,
That makes
yeah,
me
and
so unhappy.
I sold it at loss as well. It wasn't like profitable. It's like whoever bought it got a good amount out of that price.
It's probably me. I probably did it. I just it's probably me.
Yeah, that explains it.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely is some. These are interesting topics, and I think it's important for people to be aware of it as well. So when you are working from home or remotely and freelancing wise, I do want to tell people that there is a difference in how you get treated. Like if you're junior, you might not have the same leverage. If you're a senior or lead, you will more likely to get more out of it. Like I know leads who have gotten like furniture shipped over, yeah, like half of the house shipped over. So it does matter like how experienced you are. And that does define what they're willing to invest in you, right? You are I wouldn't say you're a risk, but I would say there is a risk because you're juniors. They haven't decided if you're staying or not, I guess.
Yeah. Also on the visa, I think visas are something that people don't know a whole lot about. And it's really, really important that you do know your stuff when it comes to visas, actually, especially if you're not on your own. Um, People take it for granted that and often don't tell their recruiter or whoever the company is that they're dealing with that everyone that's involved in the relocation until late in the process, which is really a big mistake because it can be a deal breaker. Not every company will, just because they're going to sponsor your visa, that doesn't actually mean that they're going to cover the costs of being your family being on your visa, and that adds an additional cost per person on a visa usually. So the if you and your whole family need visas, you can usually put your family on your visa because yours is sponsored by your employer. Some employers will say, yeah, that's fine. We'll also cover your partner and your children or whoever else. But they need to know the exact number of people. They need to know like the dates of birth of all of those people and the details, and they need to then figure out what that cost is. And then they might say, okay, we can sponsor your visa, but you need to look into what the costs of you bringing your family over here are, and then you might need to cover those costs, or they might cover them all. This is something that you need to check company by company, because it's it is, yeah, you're providing them with a service, but it's then a cost for them to, as a business, to think we're also going to cover the sponsorship of your partner and your 2 or 3 children, and each of those is an additional cost, and it can add up to quite a lot, and
So this is a good opportunity to transfer over about salary, because would you say this cost the company has is a disadvantage for the person looking for the job? Because in from the point of a company, they already have spent a lot for you to come over and work. Do you think it hampers the amount of pay you can get because of it versus if you were already in the town or city or country?
in my experience, I think that not as much as you would think. So logically speaking, you would think, right, okay, so I'm a larger cost to the company because I need a visa sponsorship and my family need visas and I need relocated, and that's going to cost a few €1,000 or whatever it may be. And then I also need a salary, and I've already cost, several €1,000 before I've even done anything. And so you'd think, logically speaking, that that means that you might suffer a bit when it comes to salary. In my experience, those are usually different budgets. So from a company perspective, they're not usually like the budget for people's salaries and for people to be paid a salary to do a job is not necessarily the same budget as the visa expense or the and the relocation. So some companies it might be, but typically speaking, I don't see too much of the visa expense meaning that your salary needs to be lower, not considerably anyway. And the reason for this is purely just because if that happened, they would probably not secure the right candidates for the jobs, because the industry is very competitive and people know what the right salaries roughly usually are for the right areas. So if someone's being offered a lower salary, they'll usually know it and it doesn't make a difference to what your cost of living is. So ultimately you need to have the standard of living that you expect from the cost of living that you're going to, and that doesn't change because you are being sponsored on a visa. So the typically speaking companies are much more are fair when it comes to this, and they'll say, yeah, you still need to be earning enough money to live. It's not your fault that you need a visa, really, so it just happens to be that you have the
Yeah.
right skill set for us and you're not here right now. So I think people think that that's happening far more than it actually is. I think where you're more likely to see that happen is maybe very small independent companies where their budget overall isn't massive. Amit lives in London. The so the when it comes to the uh, the expenses of a small independent company, you are more likely to potentially sit for the company to just say to you, hey, we just can't afford the amount of expense that it's going to be.
I mean, they would really want you if they did. I mean, if they're paying for you and your family in this example, they would obviously really believe in you, and hopefully it works out. Otherwise, they wouldn't be using their visa quota on you, I guess. So the visa quota, is it transferred over as a part of the max limit, or is it just renewed every year? So you get like three or one. Let's just say you get three every year, and if you have three previously, it doesn't nullify it. You just get three new ones.
I'm not entirely sure. I think it depends on the company and the how big the company actually is. But normally the number is dependent upon what their license is and how big a company they actually are. So the numbers are usually quite big, and for larger
Okay.
companies, they're typically not. Like there's a lot of companies that just say to me, if I say, can you sponsor for these types of positions? How are you on your visa quota? They usually, a lot of them will just say like, don't worry about it, we're fine.
Right.
But then smaller
Okay.
companies might be like, hey, we have like a couple of visas left, kind of thing. Um, I don't know if it runs over or not. I suspect not. I think that
It will
that's
be weird though, because then you run out. That's eventually like what you're gonna do. You're like, sorry, out of visa quota, can't hire you. Sorry.
yeah.
It sounds like it's reset. But that brings us to the other question: what if I'm staying in EU on a student visa in EU, doing a master's degree, for example? Would that make it easy for students in EU to hire me if I'm assuming already in the country studying as a student, or are they breaking potentially some laws?
No, it is easier, but they still have to. Depends on what your student visa looks like. So if you're on a student visa and your student visa says that once you graduate, you can work for 2 years on that student visa or something like that, then that means that you're no cost to the company for that 2 years except for your salary. So that's great. So yeah, it can be advantageous to already have studied. Also, a lot of countries for visas work on a point system to get a visa. So, uh, and to boil the point system down to the simplest way I can explain it, it is a list of questions, and depending on what your answers are to those questions, which are factual, they're not. It's not a quiz, so it's like questions about your circumstances, depending on the things that you have or the things that you do not have, or how many points. So, for example, you normally in the UK, for example, if you have a job offer from a company that's based in the UK, I think that's normally 20 points. So that's a job offer, you're already 20 points, and you need like 60 points or more to get to be eligible for the visa. So, and I think in most countries, most of the time, studying at a university in the country is and having a degree from a university in the country also gives you some points. So you're more likely to be able to get the visa um, based on already been studying in the country or in the continent. It also means that you're less of a relocation cost probably because you're closer already, and they'll ultimately they'll probably still be looking to sponsor you because I don't think most student visas have the 2 year work thing on them anymore, to be honest. So I think most of the time your student visa will give you an amount of time to find a job without having to leave the country after you graduate. And then, but if someone wants to give you a job and you're not a citizen or you don't have resident status of the country that you're in, then they'll still have to sponsor you. So all those costs will still happen. But typically, on a social level, I think it helps if they know that you're used to the culture, that you maybe that you speak the language if you've been studying in that country and you've been dealing with that sort of thing more often, then I think it does work to your advantage, but not from a um, typically not from on a financial level, just on an experience level.
Hmm. I think, yeah, I want to point out that this is why I suggest people to at least get a master's degree, even if you are doing game development. I mean, a lot of people advise like there's no need for education, there's a lot of free stuff you can go learn. In this case, lightingbot.com, you can learn lighting as well without going to the university. But I still suggest you get a master's degree because it is a huge advantage when you do need to move to a country that does not include EU, for example, or Schengen visa if you're from countries like Norway. Then you're at a disadvantage because you might not get enough points to even get into the country, and then what? Your dreams shattered, gone. So I think from a strategic point of view, yes, you might end up in debt. Considering the country, it depends on the country. In Norway, it's free for education, so most likely you won't go in debt unless you pick a private school. So if you have a master's degree, I think there's an advantage. I think I got like 90 out of 100 because of my master's degree, and it was also I had a master's degree from the UK as well, and I have a master's degree from the US on purpose as well. So if I ever relocate, I'll still get like max point if I do relocate because of these decisions that I've done ahead of time. So I do think it's important to do those kind of things. At least a bachelor's degree that doesn't give you full points, but it gives you, I think, like a minor amount of points if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, most government websites, by the way, if you're ever wondering about whether or not you're eligible for a visa, most government websites you can go on and start applying for a visa at no cost and not finish the application. Don't submit anything because you'll waste people's time. But um, if you go in, you can like start ticking boxes and seeing how many points you have, so that you can have an idea of where you are and what things would give you more points. So I recommend doing that.
and also, I'm only speaking from my own experience. I do recommend having the company hire an agent to deal with your visa and not being the one who does it because there's a lot of complications. There's always like bank accounts. We haven't talked about it. Like you need a bank account if you accept working from home and you have to relocate from a new country. Even though you are working from home, you still have to cover the basic rules as working in a studio, right? So
Yeah.
then opening a bank account, then you have to have an address, which is a lot of work, as you say, especially when it comes to family. So I do agree. You need to know about the visa stuff. You do need to know about the country as well. It is insanely expensive, even if you cover some of the cost on your own, and it's just very resource heavy, time consuming as well. So
Yeah, and a common question that I get, or the question that often comes up too late, unfortunately, is what do I do if I want to move with my partner and we both need visas and we're not married? So the thing that in most cases, for a lot of countries, the thing that you need is three different kinds of proof that you have lived together for more than 3 years, sometimes 2 years, depending on the country. This means that you should have bank statement. If you can get a joint account with your partner, I recommend doing it, even if you're not going to use it a lot, because it shows that you both, that's a proof. If you have separate bank accounts, make sure that they're both linked to the same address so that it's proof that you live together. Um, and just bills that are coming to both of you at the same address. That's really important, because if you're not, it's sort of antiquated the way that the visa system works when it comes to marriage, because marriage used to be the way that everyone worked. That was what happened. Everyone grew up and got married, but that's not the case anymore. So the if you're not married, it's actually more difficult to relocate together, and for the company to get you both the visa, or for you just to get the visa if you're not married. So you need to have this proof. Don't just go out and get married. It's certainly
I
more
was about
simple.
to say that. Just go get
I,
married.
I literally have had people that have said they've gotten, job offers, and they've not been able to guarantee that their partner can move with them because of these stipulations, and have literally just said, we're just going to go and get married, and then we'll move in a few months' time, because that it will be easier once we're married. Like, that's actually happened. So you just look into what's actually required, because it's not as simple as you think it is.
Hmm. So, salary and contracts. Is there any things we should suggest on when it comes to salary and contract, picking from remote and home? Can someone ask for more or less? What are the expectations, and how do you go on about it?
Yeah, I think it's important to just be able to justify whatever you ask for, and that's always really important. And also be receptive to justification from the other side, from the company, to give you potentially less, right? So, for example, you might say, okay, I have to be a limited company, and I have to pay a bit more tax as a result of that. So for that reason, I'm paying this percentage more tax. So I'm going to ask for this percentage more money as on my salary. Make sure that that's clearly outlined so that you're justified in asking for it. But then also remember that the company probably wasn't giving you a lower salary because you were working from home. In most cases, I don't normally see that, even though you are, you know, not having to commute. They might actually be paying for you to have some equipment and stuff like that. So you're actually getting a higher expense. You are probably, if you drive, you might be saving a lot of money on fuel. If you don't drive and you live in a big city, you probably spend several €100s a year on public transport costs. So you're not having to do all of that. So just be receptive to them. Like, don't just think about how much money you have to spend to work to go into an office. Think of how much money you save from not having to, and how much the company has to potentially pay and to give you the appropriate workstation, as opposed to what they would already have in the office for you. So um, I think it's fair to ask for more potentially if your situation means that you would be worse off, but you need to justify it. Say exactly why. When it comes to salary discussions, my number one piece of advice always is just be honest. A lot of people have this um, skewed view on how you're supposed to talk about salary negotiation. I think it's mostly because of like TV and movies and stuff, where people always go in and say, "Oh yeah, say that you're on more than what you're on," and because they're probably going to offer you 10% less than that anyway. It's not really the case anymore. It's not really what happens. The industry is too niche, and there are not enough people to be able to do that. So, typically speaking, the best conversation that you can have is someone saying, "What do you want?" and then you saying what you want, right? And if you don't know what it is that you want, then tell them that you don't know and all the reasons why you do not know. So I don't know what the appropriate cost of living is. I don't know what my rent is going to be compared to what it is right now. The cost of living is so different that it's so hard for me to picture what I'm supposed to be paying, that I can't. I'm really having a lot of trouble ask for help. Say, can you advise me on this so that I can make sure that I don't end up in a situation where I've joined you and then I have to either leave or ask you for more money after the fact because I can't afford to live here. So talk about it as a person, rather than trying to. Don't think of it as a negotiation. Think of it as a conversation. So you're saying, I be honest about what you earn. That's what I usually say, especially if you're coming from somewhere that is potentially lower cost of living, um, to somewhere that's a higher cost of living, because they're not going to offer you it. Like, a lot of people are scared to say what they're earning, if they're from somewhere where it's a low cost of living area, because they think, well, if I tell you that I'm only earning this much, then you're probably only going to offer me a little bit more than that, and I'm scared that that's the case because that's not enough. That's not
I
going
had
to
the
happen.
opposite. I had the opposite problem because I come from Norway, which is,
Oh yeah, of course.
it's too much. So they were like, "What? No, we can't afford you to pay you that." I'm like, "What? But this is normal." I was like, "Really? What? You pay me this much?" I'm like, "What? That's nothing."
Yeah, exactly. People just remember that that perspective that you have is also the perspective that the person you're speaking to might has. They might have no idea what it's like where you are. So you need to educate them on that and say, listen, I earn this much a month. This is how much my rent is. And then the person will probably go, oh, wow, your rent's going to be 5 times that here, right? So obviously we're going to offer you more money. Like, they're not going to put you in a situation where you cannot afford your rent and to have a life outside of work. Like that, well, not anyone that I work with
Yeah.
anyway.
I mean,
So
I briefly mentioned it last time, but I'm gonna mention it again. There's a different problem. I can necessarily move back to Norway and live as well because I've been earning less while I've been outside of the country, right? So it's I think that's also why I want to remind people that if you do get a job and it's maybe your dream job and it happens to be in a low income country, so it could be third world countries, it could be Eastern Europe in this case as well. Do consider the fact that if you plan on moving back, consider calculate the cost of living, calculate how much saving you can make and how it is when you actually move back, because especially if you visit your family and stuff, I've had people who go back to the more expensive country. They can't enjoy the time as much because they picked a job that is like not a lot, and then when they visit the family, it's a lot less to enjoy. So just keep that in mind. It shouldn't be a problem, but it can be a problem, I think, and it's just something to be aware of. Which leads us to one of the last questions before I forcefully have to let you go because I don't want to take too much of your time again.
sure.
But because we briefly talked about working remotely. Now, you said working remotely is you have to set your own company, pay on extra taxes, probably on pension, private pension, and healthcare sometimes, depending on country, I guess, so on and so forth. But what's the difference doing that and being a freelancer? Is there a difference? Is there a pro con disadvantage? What's going on there? It can be a bit confusing, can't it?
Yeah, definitely. So, um, legally, being a freelancer, um, is the same. Okay, but socially and privately, it's typically not the same. What I mean by that is, I have a lot of companies and studios that I work with who I'm recruiting for, and they will say, this is a permanent full-time position, but we have the ability to hire someone on a remote basis because we have the infrastructure for that. Um, and but if we hire them and they're not in the same country as us, and we don't have an entity in the country, because some companies, like really large companies, can hire someone permanently even from a different country if a part of their company is in that country, then that's still possible sometimes. But if that's not the case, then they're basically hiring you as a freelancer. Your contract will say that you are a freelancer or a contractor on it, but the agreement privately between you and the company is that you're essentially working there as a permanent member of the team, which basically means for you, you're probably going to pay you essentially invoice the same amount every month as if you were earning a salary, and you are planned to be there for as long as you want to be there, and your contract will just be continuously renewed. So it's more stable than being just like someone who's working as a freelancer who gets paid per project or paid per day, or and doesn't necessarily know how long that contract is going to be, or maybe you do know and it's a month or it's 3 months or whatever, and then you know as you're getting towards the end of that 3 months that you need to start finding your next thing, or you're not going to have any money coming in. So even though it's legally the same thing where you're a freelancer and you're a freelancer, if a company is employing you as a freelancer because of circumstance and not because that's what they planned on doing, then that's typically more secure and more similar to having a permanent job. It just so happens that you're not in the same country as your employer. So that's the difference.
So that leads me to the last question, maybe the last question. Contracts. There are certain companies who hire you based on a contract. 6 months contract is very common in certain companies, where you have to relocate. Even you are relocating, even remotely, it doesn't really matter. Let's just use both scenarios. You're working from home, or you're working remotely, or you're having to be in the studio, but it's a 6 month contract. Is it fair to say that because it's a 6 month contract, should it be treated as a full-time position or potential, which is the idea they tend to sell, or the fact that it's 6 months contract, should you then get earning more as if you were doing a 6 months freelance contract? Or what's the mindset that you are aware of, and what do you think is how do you approach it? How do you negotiate that kind of situation? Because in my head, I'm like, well, if I'm paying taxes, or if I'm just have a certain time frame, because normally when you're a freelancer, you tend to earn more per hour than someone who's full time, because you're it's unstable, as you say. You don't know when you might get work or not work. So what's going on in this example then? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's tricky. I think if you're on a 6 month contract, for example, if that 6 month contract includes benefits and includes like everything that you would have if you were a permanent employee, I think that if you could probably still potentially ask for a little bit more because you know that you're not going to be sticking around, but um, I don't think that you would have as much ammunition for negotiation, I guess, as because they're still going to, pay. You could still earn bonus. You can still, have some time off, and it's paid time off and stuff like that. I think this is another one that depends on how senior you are as well. So if you are very senior and the company needs someone for 6 months because they need to finish their game and they currently don't have someone, then you sort of have the upper hand there where you can say like, hey, I'm the person, like I'm the person that you need. You've already made me an offer because so I know that I'm the person that you need. Um, and I'm only going to be doing this for 6 months. So you could potentially up your salary expectation a little bit there because
Hmm.
you're in an advantageous situation. Whereas I think if you're more junior and you're being offered a 6 month contract, then part of that 6 months is potentially the company sort of making sure that you grow and that you're going to be someone that they might want to extend that contract with or potentially make the contract permanent. In which case, I would say if you're a graduate or a junior who wants to change what they're doing, and a company that's sort of working on something that you think gives you career progression and is offered, I would say don't be too picky if you're junior or a graduate and you're being offered a 6 month contract. If it sounds good and they're paying enough, and you're going to be okay, like, and you're going to progress in your career, I would say take that 6 month contract because you'll be blown
Yeah.
away by how much
Stop
more
crying.
employable you
Just do
become.
it.
Yeah, you'll be blown away by how much more employable you become after that 6 months of full-time experience at a game studio. And they might even make you permanent anyway. But so I think if you're more junior, not so much negotiation room there. But if you're more senior, and you're only being offered a 6 month contract, I think you're justified in saying, hey, since I only have 6 months of guaranteed work here, um, I'm going to ask for a little bit more.
Mhm. One more question, maybe two.
Yes, fine.
Um, um, because you mentioned, oh, I've had it so nicely phrased in my head. Um, 6 months contract. Um, oh, damn it. You mentioned a 6 months contract that you should take it, but what happens if you apply for a job? Because we kind of didn't answer that or explore that topic a little bit. Because this is typical question. This is like almost every day I get the message saying, "I didn't get the job. I don't have enough experience." There are skillful people that can look at the portfolio. You're good. Definitely, you should have a job, but they keep applying. And then there's the second part of the question: is some people don't get the job because they don't speak English very well, and the company don't offer to coach them in languages. And I don't know if it's because they didn't ask for it or if it's not of interest of the company. So it's two-sided. It's one, don't have enough experience. Two, don't know the language. How do you approach these scenarios?
I'm going to do the last one first, just because I think it's an easier question. So the language one is it, it takes a long time for an adult to learn a language. Typically, if you're learning a language as a child, you can learn much faster. But if you're an adult and you're learning a language, um, it takes a long time, and it's quite common for a studio who's hiring to need someone who's going to come in and immediately be able to do the job with learning of some of the systems and the workflows, but not the language that's being spoken every day. So it's so much so actually that part of the visa process for most countries is actually a language test for English, and if the English is the spoken language of the company, it's quite common for an English language test to be part of the visa process. And if you don't pass that test, you do not get the visa, because it makes for collaborative workflow. It makes for fast work.
Unless you studied in the country, because then it shows
Yep,
evidence. So that's
that's
also
true.
another reason why you should be doing it. Let's skip
Definitely.
that process. But what if
Um,
they already know the language, dude? Like, because I'm specifically asking because I know someone and he writes fine. I think he talks probably fine, but he's received it twice now that he doesn't speak well enough. While in contrast, I have a colleague in my company who's learning as we're speaking now, and I've been in France where I didn't know the language, and they paid a little bit for the classes as well. So it varies, of course, but yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on how
I, th-
to negotiate or maybe point out uh, how to
I
approach
think
it.
if yeah, if you think that you speak the language well enough to do the job and that you're being told that that's not the case, I think you should, at this point, you've not really got anything to lose as long as you're not rude, right? So don't be rude, don't be offensive or disrespectful. But if you do go back and say, listen, I think my communication is being underrated, or for lack of a better word, I think that I do have the communication skills that are required. Is there any other reason that I am not being accepted or offered the job? And try and see if there's actually another reason in there. Um, and just, or ask for another opportunity, just say like, listen, I'm willing to do like a language test, or is there anything that can I have another discussion? Because a lot of the time, there's people that speak near close to perfect English to me on a call, and then they go into an interview and one of their heroes is on the interview from game development, and they lose the ability to speak in the second language because they just are nervous and they're a little bit starstruck, and they get asked a question where it's not typical English that's being used. It's very technical terms that you don't know how to say in your second language. So if that situation arises, it is fine to pause and like sit with a translate tool on your screen and just say, just a second, I can't think of the word in English, and quickly check it um, while you're on the call, because trying to talk around it and trying to say something in a language that your interviewer doesn't speak is just going to make them think that your communication is worse. Whereas if you actually just take a moment and say, oh, I can't remember how to say this in English, give me one moment, and then quickly check how to say it in English, and then say it in English once you've read it, that's better because that shows that you do know, you just forgot or can't remember. And that's not really any different to a programmer who's forgetting how to execute a particular and just has to quickly Google it. It's just the same.
I think I do think maybe I don't have any factual evidence yet, but based on this personal experience, I do think it might be the accent as well. Like they actually know English, but it's hard for the person who knows the language to understand their version of the accent. So they're like, it sounds broken, but actually they are completely saying it, kind of correctly. I think that might be an issue. Would you say it's advantage for someone who has this issue or challenge that they suggest maybe getting a few hours of language pack paid, or that themselves commit to it? They're saying that, if I get this, I'll pay for tutors. I'll make sure I spend my time learning as soon as possible. Would you say that might persuade a company, go, okay, if you're committing to it and you're saying it, we'll type that in the contract?
If it was the only reason that they weren't getting the job, then yes, I think it would make a massive difference to offer to do that. And I do think that accents do make a difference. I had someone just the other day who asked me if I was okay with them speaking to me with a French accent. And I was like, yeah. And they were like, yeah, some people can't understand my English when I speak with my French accent. So when he speaks English, he speaks with an American accent on purpose because he thinks it's easier to understand. And to some people, it probably is. But to me, it was fine. But yeah, I think if you offer that sort of thing, if it's the only issue and that everything else was great, and they're saying to you, "Listen, we would hire you if your English was better," that's the only issue right now. Then yeah, say, well, how long is it going to take you to find someone? How do you have other people in mind? Is there someone else that you're going to offer the job to? And if they say, no, not yet, then you could maybe say, okay, well, my communication is already there. It just needs a little bit of improvement. Can I, commit to 1 to 3 months of language lessons to improve it? And does that make a difference to you? Because if everything else is there, then this is a quick process for me. I'm not learning the language from scratch. I'm just learning to better my current skills. To be honest, it's not something that's come up with me very often in all my years of recruitment, with unless the person's English is to the point where the call has to be stopped because you're not understanding one another. Just be honest with your language skills. Quite often when I contact someone for the first time and say, hey, can we have a discussion to talk about some jobs that I think would be a good fit for you? And it's really common for people to comment back to me and say, yeah, but my English isn't great, so can we do text instead of a call? I almost always say, can we do a
Yeah.
call, and then I'll judge it for myself, because then we can make a sort of judgment
Mm.
call. Because if we can't have a discussion, then you're not going to be able to do the interview.
Yeah.
You know.
It's definitely important, I think, to be able to have just a conversation. I don't think you should bypass that at all. And the second question, how about that one?
The
Which
second
we
you
forgot.
I've forgotten what you asked. Yeah. What did you say?
I was hoping you remembered it.
It was
uh,
I
it
think you
was
said, go ahead.
what it was. I talked about what was this, I even forgot the second answer already.
I think
Um,
I think I said both of them, because it was you mentioned about language, but then there was also it was about something to do with like relocating or something like that, or maybe it was not getting the job because of a particular thing. the language one was the one I answered because I think it comes up less, but I don't know if you can
Yeah.
remember. Maybe someone in the chat remembers.
So I think obviously these are some challenges people have when it comes to looking for a job. The first question was when you don't have an experience.
Oh yeah.
It's a very common thing. We kind of briefly talked about it previously that you should apply, but when you get the reply back saying you don't have enough experience, my normal advice, at least as a student, for students, is that you should be doing extra stuff besides university, modding, even work for free if you have to. But for some reason, depending on culture and work ethic, people are very hesitant unless they get paid for it. My first job was 1 year for free. That's how I got into the industry. I worked a year for a studio for free because it happened to be in the same town. I lived at home. I got paid $23 a day. And that's it. That's what I did for a year to get a head start. So not everyone is going to go through that length to make it to get past these excuses that you don't have experience. But I do think there's always is a solution depending on you and how far you're willing to go. So what's the easiest solution of getting experience when you're being told you don't have experience?
Yeah, exactly what you said. I completely agree with Amit. You should be doing the work, whether it's if you get an opportunity to do work for free for a game studio and you have no experience, that is how you get experience. That is someone is opening a door and saying that has a big wall that says experience inside that room. And if you don't kick that door down and go in, then you're giving up the opportunity to get a job a little bit later down the line, whether it's with that studio or not. So yeah, I would, because otherwise the alternative, what I'm going to tell you, is that you're still going to have to work for free anyway, just for yourself and not for someone else. So, and that experience is actually um, potentially less valuable than unpaid experience for a studio, because unpaid experience for a studio shows that you're able to take direction, that you're able to take instruction, that you're able to work as part of a team. Whereas if all you're doing is your own portfolio work, then that shows that you can do the work, but it doesn't necessarily show that you can contribute to a game. It doesn't necessarily show that you're used to working with other artists, because you might not have access to an environment artist that can give you an environment to light, for example, if you're a lighting artist. So um, if you're constantly being told you don't have enough experience, then you need to, and people say, how do I get experience without having experience? It's really common. We're asked it every day. So, and I'm not saying it's not frustrating. I really sympathize. I worked for free for 3 years in my old career before I decided to change to recruitment in order to get my previous job. And it's I understand the feeling of being told constantly that you don't have enough experience and you need experience to get the job, and you're in this vicious circle that's never ending. It's hard, and I know it's hard, but the weight, if your portfolio says that it hasn't been updated for 6 months, then their automatic thought is going to be, do you only want to do this for money, right? Because if you're not
Right.
doing it now, then why should I consider you a lighting artist or a visual effects artist or a technical artist if you're not
It's a good
already
point.
doing it, you know?
Never thought about that.
Yeah, so it's
Hmm.
most people who want to work, who are artists and want to work in games or in CG or whatever else, they you do it as a hobby and think, I want to do this as a job, and you end up getting paid to do it eventually. But the reason that you get paid to do it is because you've already proven that you can do it. So that doesn't mean that you need a paid job to show that you have experience. You need to, even if the job description says experience on 2 shipped titles, um, if you're working on projects and your portfolio is good and you can show that you can do the work, then you will be considered. It's still going to be a bit of a slog. It's still going to be difficult, and you'll get more rejections than you will acceptances. But it's
Yeah.
important to do the work
My,
constantly.
my opinion is um, if you're updating your portfolio, you're making new portfolio pieces, and you have got rejected a few times, and you see that it's not your skills but your experience. That should tell you to stop making your own portfolio pieces. Find someone who you can work for. If you can't find a company, find someone who needs something.
Yep.
Get them to do it. Just do it for them. Get their reference. Show that you can work at least in a smaller group, because I think part of the experience issue, also whenever I hire for any personal projects or any outsourcing I do on the time to time, is obviously to know that you can communicate and deal with the stress that comes with the issue with working with teams, because it's not straightforward. There's always going to be, how do you take feedback, how do you take critique, how do you handle when there's a deadline, what do you do? There's the other stuff that you don't experience, that's not necessarily skill based, right? So I have been trying to explain people who come to me and say, okay, I'm happy to pay you a little bit to do something I need for lighting board, for example, but they don't want to do it. I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. I'm trying to help you and I'm willing to pay you a little bit. It's not 100%, but you're getting something out of it. You're getting reference, you're getting something. So I'm trying to explain that to people, that if you're doing it on your own, it's not working. That means you need someone else to validate you, to
Yeah.
give you approval that, yeah, this person knows the stuff.
Yeah, that is excellent advice. And like, it doesn't need to be Lighting Bot, but it's a great resource to do so. It does, but you can even just go on ArtStation or any other resource like that, and people put up posts saying, like, artist wanted or something like that.
Or
Or
modding.
yeah, and that's great. Like, just doing stuff to show that you can work as part of a team, because it's difficult for someone to look at your portfolio that's all your own work and know how long it took you, unless you're writing all of this, which a lot of people don't. Whereas if you can say, I proactively went out. I got some rejections saying, you can put all this on your CV. After getting multiple rejections due to not having enough experience, I proactively seek out other people to work with, ask them what they needed from me. I worked with them. I delivered this project. I worked with a team of 4 in order to do so. I communicated with these people. That's the type of stuff that you're missing. That's the experience that you're missing. It's not that they don't think you're a lighting artist yet. If you've got a lighting portfolio, you're a lighting artist. But they're saying the experience that they're saying that you're missing is the experience of working on a project with a team, not that you can't light.
Yeah, I mean, for the record, when I did it, when I was a student, I was already doing modding, which this is one like typical advice I will give to people is, when you're doing, as I said, you're a student, even if you have a part-time job, pick like an evening job during daytime that like to do lots of modding to help people do their stuff. And I did like modding for Freelancer, which was a space game from Microsoft back in 2002, I think. And then I did Unreal Tournament 2004 when that came out. And I did Neverwinter Nights 2, which is an RPG game. We had 2 of the biggest servers in the whole game. Was like, I did a level design and lighting for it, and that's kind of how I planned it out. And I think people underestimate it, because some people think that being taken advantage of because they're doing something for free or for fun, or someone else is getting something more out of it, probably. But I think you have to look at it from a point of view that you are actually taking advantage of them, and you are getting some experience and some opportunity that someone else can take. There's always going to be someone else who takes it, so it's either you or no one.
That's exactly right. And to put it into perspective, whenever I interview someone, whenever I talk to them who's, a graduate looking for a job, and if I see their CV and it says that they did an internship at a game studio, I probably spend about 3/4 of the call talking to them about their responsibilities during that internship, because if it was a free, like, unpaid internship or work experience that they did at a studio. And the reason is because that's all the stuff that I'm going to go and tell the hiring manager about, to show that they are not just every other graduate.
Well, I would love to keep talking, because now you put internship, and then there's like, is it legal to get unpaid? There's certain countries that there's different rules, but that's maybe for another time. So thank you so much for attending, Gary. I appreciate it. A lot of new insights. As usual, we go over time because there's just so much to cover all the time. But I appreciate it. I do want to say thank you for everyone else. Just a quickly reminder, just go to lightingbot.com and you can learn a little bit more. We do have articles, by the way, on lightingbot.com. People who are uncomfortable being on camera or talking. They prefer articles normally. So you can find articles about people as well besides the videos. So I just want to say goodbye to everyone. I'll talk a little bit more with Gary before he runs away, probably to eat or something. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you for watching. Do like, spread the video, subscribe, YouTube algorithm, all that. So have a nice day. I'm also quite hungry. So goodbye.
See ya.